Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Token Engineering 360 session.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Great you're here. Some of you might... Hello, welcome again. Some of you have been in our first session. If you just joined for the second session, no problem. So some words about this program. As you probably know, Token Engineering Academy is building the first bachelor level comprehensive education and certification program for token engineering. This program and this course will be available from September 22, meaning we all still have a lot of time for learning and getting together, meeting each other. So we decided to create this Token Engineering 360 program as an on-ramping, right? Getting ready for TE fundamentals. And this is a combination of 6 sessions where we go over major articles and writings of the thought leaders in token engineering. Last week, we have been discussing Trent McConaghy's article, Can Blockchains Go Rogue? And today, we'll discuss Vitalik Buterin's article about the meaning of decentralization. This is the topic of today. We always take a look at, start with some quotes from this article and then go deeper. And every one of you is invited to add your thoughts. And you can either comment in the chat or you can, of course, switch on your mic and then we take it from there. All right. Patti is with me from Team TE Academy. Yeah, quick hello from your side as well, I guess.
Yes, hi. Welcome, everyone. Yes, I am helping Angela to promote and make the fundamentals happen. And in the meanwhile, I'm super happy to see this room packed with people learning, wanting to learn and debate. And hopefully we will make use of all this good energy and maybe even have local hub study groups eventually. So yeah, and if you need anything from my side, from information, links, you can just drop your message and I can see how to help. And yeah, I'm based in Brazil and would be nice to see where you are from. So if you want to drop your location in the chat, always fun to see how far we go.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Patty. And maybe you have a moment later to also drop the Discord link for the TE360 Discord channel. There is a Discord channel on the Token Engineering Discord. In case you are not there, make sure to join this channel. This is for continuing the conversation and meet your colleagues in token engineering. All right. And with that, I'd like to start with the discussion. Again, today's session is about Vitalik Buterin's The Meaning of Decentralization. And actually, he wrote this article back in 2017. So this is a while ago. Let's see if his arguments are still valid. I start with the first quote. When people talk about software decentralization, there are actually 3 separate axes of centralization or decentralization that they might be talking about. While in some cases, it is difficult to see how you can have one without the other, in general, they are quite independent of each other. The axes are the follows. First, architectural decentralization. How many physical computers is a system made up of? How many of those computers can it tolerate breaking down at any single time? Second, political decentralization. how many individuals or organizations ultimately control the computers that the system is made up of. And thirdly, logical decentralization. Does the interface and data structures that the system presents and maintains look more like a single monolithic object or an amorphous swarm? One simple heuristic is if you cut the system in half, including both providers and users, both halves continue to fully operate as independent units. So 3 aspects: architectural decentralization, political decentralization, and logical decentralization. And I'm pretty sure if you've read this article, you've made up your mind of, okay, what about blockchain? And actually, Buterin provides the answer in his article. He says blockchains are politically decentralized. No one controls them. And architecturally decentralized. No infrastructural central point of failure, the nodes. But they are logically centralized. There is one commonly agreed state, and the system behaves like one single computer. First, I'd like to make sure that we are all on the same page here. Does this make sense to you, or any comments or questions on this decentralization, the definitions, these 3 perspectives of centralization, decentralization, architecturally, politically, logically decentralized? And are there any questions? Make sense to you? Oh, yes. I should say, you can raise your hands. The best is you just raise your hands. There is this tiny little element with reactions at the Zoom interface at the lower area of your screen. And there you can raise your hand. And Tiago raised his hand. Tiago, please switch on your mic.
I also, good morning, everyone. Tiago from Brazil here. I believe Matt Johnson also raised his hand, but it was like physically, good. So when I was reading the article, I was thinking about more like, okay, if we focus on the code of the system, it's basically mechanical or electrical. Okay, it makes sense for me to think about decentralization. But when I think about organizations, I also bear in mind that we are talking about people. And when I think about people working inside or within an organization, I also think about the distribution, about like how people can be truly distributed. That's why, because he started the article about talking about distribution and this in decentralization. Yes. So when I think about people, I truly believe that we can go deeper in the decentralization, like distribution, when we think about individual choices, not just form groups of people, like decentralized groups of people to organize themselves. I think about more of that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, Tiago, for sharing. I guess we'll dig into that in the course of this session and also in our final session with governance as capital. I think actually this is important because this whole conversation about decentralization started, if we look at the time back 2017 and also 2016 with the DAO hack, and the DAO as this first decentralized autonomous organization. We started with layer 1 protocols and with like the key experiments on how to design decentralized systems. Now we've made a lot of experiments on top of that with organizations and humans in organizations, and we shouldn't. I would suggest let's not mix it up because it's not one is equal each other. However, they are somehow related via tokens, right? Because via the tokens, we can create and design the policies, how to govern the protocols, how to make changes. And also we define our own roles in these organizations. And I guess this is a link to what you said, organizations and humans in organizations. All right, Matt, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, when I read the article, so I had, as a founder of a project in the DAO tooling space, I'm constantly wrestling with decentralization because people want to know, are you decentralized or not? And knowing the operational, so what I looked at, I said, well, you got to untangle that. For me, I came up with my own 3 types of decentralization before I even read this article in preparation for this. And for me, it made a lot of sense. And when I read Buteric's article, it was confusing to me. And I thought the terminology he used were troublesome in that they're not an obvious term to use for the types of definitions he was providing. And I thought it also came from a very engineering centric standpoint. And so for me, it did not make sense. And so this is what I had already figured out that just logically made sense to me. But I would say that this, what I'm about to present is more geared for a DAO that has technology in this Web3 space. And the 3 terms I looked at from a decentralization was, one is legally. Is the organization set up legally decentralized? Meaning, did you try to set up a DAO with the with the ways they're doing now? There's foundations and LLCs and Cayman Island based things. And so one question asked is, okay, legally, are you a decentralized organization? And that's one answer that you have to provide when someone gives you that generic, are you decentralized? The next one is operationally, and that's the people part. Are the people that are involved decentralized, meaning they can come and go at will, they're not employees, they can contribute and be remunerated. And so operationally, you're decentralized in that you don't have a hierarchical structure with a CEO and whatnot. And that's separate from the legal, right? Because you could set up a DAO and still have a hierarchy with a boss that tells you what to do. And then lastly, for the technology that you are building, that's what a lot of people try to get at, your protocol. Well, do you have a decentralized technology? And that for me means that it's not sitting in, Amazon Web Services as a monolithic code base that you can control and can cut people off and have that, control over it, that it's, out there as an internet computer, peer-to-peer, it's distributed and no one can turn it off. And for me, that makes a lot more sense. I think the terminology is more easily understood by regular folks that might not be engineers. And that to me is, how I look at the world of the answering the question, are you decentralized?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe Matt, feel free to drop the perspectives you take for decentralization to the chat. It's certainly interesting to discuss further. Thanks for now. We'll certainly come back to it. Rohan, you also wanted to add something here on that.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So my view about this is, I think I agree with Vitalik, but I wouldn't put them as 3 separate axes. It's more like a correlated set of axioms, I would say. Because, okay, if you have political decentralization, I think the best case was the DAO hack. So the DAO hack was, okay, there was an attacker who stole the ether from the DAO, the original DAO. And then there was a decision that people had to take, and they fell into 2 different camps, right? One camp was like blockchains are supposed to reflect the current state no matter what. So they split off and made Ethereum Classic. And obviously, this was rolled back. And you see the same thing in the Bitcoin fork wars in 2017. So political decentralization and architectural decentralization. So architectural decisions are made by humans who can form cliques, and they can form groups. They can create incentives for other people to join a group, or disincentives to join some other group. So they maintain control architecturally. Logical decentralization, I think, is somewhat independent from this, because so that is a technical problem, right? So few partition network. So this is the issue that Ethereum has with sharding right now. So how many partitions? How do you communicate between the shards and other things? So I guess my point would be that they're all fairly interconnected. It's hard to say which one comes before, because in certain cases it does seem that political decentralization dominates, and in other cases architectural decentralization will hamper your ability to prevent logical partitions. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I would also agree. I mean, you can't separate. They are somehow entangled, and you can't look at either or. And I realized that we had some statements now, they're saying, okay, Buterin's axes are taking it from a pretty technical point of view. And I agree. And I would also agree that now 3 years later, or, oh my God, it's almost 5 years later, we have, let's say, it's fascinating to see what we'll be able to create with DAOs. And I feel there's a lot of attention also in the token engineering space to this political element and to this, how can we create these new organizations? Nevertheless, I'd like to point out that this is still the challenge for a token engineer includes that we build logically centralized systems, and from generally there is nothing bad in it, be it centralized or decentralized. We have the opportunity to explore this uncharted territory of decentralized organization, but there's also this benefit of having this one huge computer, unstoppable computer running on a centralized core protocol in a decentralized, architecturally, politically decentralized fashion. But if we have these logically centralized systems, now what does this mean as a challenge for a token engineer? Because then our objective is to design one system that is useful and attractive for all the different stakeholders. And how can we build mechanisms that are flexible enough for these different stakeholders and an ever continuously evolving needs, power distributions? How can we build mechanisms that are flexible enough while providing safe conditions? And Vitalik in this article also says logical centralization makes political decentralization harder. In logically centralized systems, it's harder to resolve contention by simply agreeing to live and let live, right? And that's a huge challenge for token engineers. And I guess even if we create decentralized organizations, we still have this challenge. No way around it. Okay, a lot of additional messages. Let's stay with this general topic for some more minutes. Mark. Hello.
Yes, thank you, Angela. I just a few points I wanted to add. The article was, I thought, a good primer, but I just wanted to raise a few points that I found that worth raising. So one was on, it caught my eye, that comment on between common and civil law. I'm a common law lawyer, so I just felt like I had to interject here. I would have put that in logical decentralization versus logical centralization, because it actually is a very, common law is a much more decentralized system where it's judge-made law. The judges are decentralized. They're deciding different types of logics. They sit in different jurisdictions versus civil law, which is sort of made by parliaments and then applied across the board. That was just one thing. I thought when he says blockchains, he's biased by thinking about Ethereum. There's multiple types of blockchains. There's public, private. He doesn't address that. Permissionless, all these different models. So I think he's sort of thinking in Ethereum. I think we should just be cognizant of that. And I think also just the framing, I would agree a bit on this way to logical, political, architectural. I thought of it more as policy, procedures, and structures. And I would replace logic with the procedures because they're following certain steps to build that trust that these various forms of blockchain are claiming to provide, statistically at least. The policies on how different directions can be decided, and then actually that ultimate structure, because there's different mathematical approaches to coming up with those similarly statistically trustworthy systems. So that was, and then I think just in general, I'm thinking quantum, we should try to move a bit. I know it's on a square matrix, but like thinking a little less on these binary distinctions and sort of really looking at what is the spectrum of those meanings. And so we can really start seeing the different colors and grays in between them. So those are my points. Over. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for sharing. And there are a lot of comments in the chat as well. So everyone feel free to discuss further in the chat in parallel. Alexander.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks, Angela. Well, I more have a question after reading this, and it would be good maybe to have some answer on this question. So when I was reading, with architectural decentralization is more understandable. It can be, built from the start. But with this political decentralization, the question in my head, what is the timing for it? Because it feels, if I'm building a project, I have a vision, let's say myself as a person, for 5 years, I would want to run it under my vision. And then maybe to transition, to decentralize politically. So I would want to control it. And I think even from projects that just start, this, let's say, common thing, go to market, is very important, and to win in a go-to-market battle, it's I think logically better to do centralized way to some extent. So my question is how to approach this timing thing of decentralizing politically. Mm-hmm. Is there any approaches for that?
I mean, you are, I guess, do you know this paradigm of step-by-step decentralization? I should share an article, I'll find it for you. So meaning this has been established and discussed, let's say, from investors investing into crypto projects, because there you have this, okay, you want to find a strong builder team, and then at some point decide progressive decentralization. I was looking for this term. Have you heard about it, progressive decentralization? Okay.
No.
Yeah, so this is a very famous article about a VC's point of view when to decentralize. Your exact question, coming from this, I would say, traditional point of view that you need a strong founder team, and at some point you are ready to hand over the power to more and more subgroups who have their own autonomy in making decisions and then fully decentralize. And of course, and there is certainly, as a matter of fact, crypto projects are built in this way of progressive decentralizations. And but there can be also the opposite direction, where you try to build organizations bottom up. Both has its challenges, and certainly building from bottom up is then even newer. And linking, I mean, bottom up communities is nothing new at all, but linking this with a monetary instrument or like investment decisions like a token is a super new challenge. I'll share this article, Progressive Decentralization. Xavier, or Javier.
Javier, yeah.
Okay.
No, this is a really interesting question. And I understand the wish to drive the conversation away from the technical aspect. And obviously Vitalik is coming at it from a very technical perspective, but I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of the primitives that we're building these systems on need to be technologically decentralized. Otherwise, it's a lot of empty promises that we're giving, because the reason the trail of blockchains is that under political pressure, they'll be able to, because of the architectural decisions of the technological primitives that we're building this whole thing under, that even in the face of political pressure, there is no way for a centralized system to decide or to change the outcome or to manipulate the outcomes that we're doing. So in the sense, I mean, there is obviously decentralization without technological, but for these systems that we're building right now, like the conversation about architectural decentralization, as Vitalik, is sort of like the core thing that things are being built on.
Yeah, and I'd just like to invite everyone to be precise on this decentralization. You again said technological or technical decentralization. Actually, again, we are building systems that are, from a protocol code perspective, that are centralized. It's one protocol, but at the same time, it's running on many computers. This is the architectural element. And the challenge for token engineers is the centralization, right? How to make it work for so many different participants in the ecosystem with one single body, one single protocol.
Yeah. Yeah, and the technical foundations of the protocol are really, really important.
Right. Let's move on, but I've seen your raised hands, and probably Alex will get back to your comments as well. Because in this article, Vitalik also gives the 3 reasons why we decentralize, and probably it's good to take a look at this. What are the reasons? Why do we decentralize? Why do we do it, after all? Number 1 reason is fault tolerance. Decentralized systems are less likely to fail accidentally because they rely on many separate components that are not likely to fail. Number 1, fault tolerance. Number 2, attack resistance. Decentralized systems are more expensive to attack and destroy or manipulate because they lack sensitive central points that can be attacked at much lower costs than the economic size of the surrounding system. This is the second one, attack resistance. And the third one is collusion resistance. It is much harder for participants in decentralized systems to collude, to act in ways that benefit them at the expense of other participants. Whereas the leadership of corporations and governments collude in ways that benefit themselves, but harm less well-coordinated citizens, customers, employees, and the general public all the time. The third one, collusion resistance. 3 reasons: fault tolerance, attack resistance, and collusion resistance. And let's, for a moment, take a closer look at fault tolerance. 1 reason why we decentralize. I quote again, the fault tolerance requirement in its naive form focuses on architectural decentralization, the nodes. But once you start thinking about fault tolerance of the community that governs the protocol's ongoing development, then political decentralization is important too. And he gives some examples. it is crucially important to have multiple competing implementations. The knowledge of the technical considerations behind protocol upgrades must be democratized so that more people can feel comfortable participating in research discussions and criticizing protocol changes that are clearly bad. Core developers and researchers should be employed by multiple companies and organizations, or alternatively, many of them can be volunteers. Mining algorithms should be designed in a way that minimizes the risk of centralization. And finally, referring to proof of work versus proof of stake, ideally we use proof of stake to move away from hardware centralization risk entirely, though we should also be cautious of new risks that pop up due to proof of stake. Now, looking at this aspect of fault tolerance, why do we decentralize? We want to make systems fault tolerant. And what he gave as examples how this can be implemented. Let's think of the decentralized protocols projects we know today. What's the situation today? For example, when it comes to knowledge distribution and research discussions, what are your observations and thoughts on that? I'd be keen to learn more about cases you've seen, discussions you were engaged in. What about knowledge distribution and research discussions? Anything you'd like to add here? You can just raise your hands or add your comment in the chat. Any observations when it comes to knowledge distribution or maybe power distribution? What about that one? Alex?
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Good day. Yeah, this reminds me of the social graph, and I was denoting this in the chat. I'll move it to the Discord so we can have larger discussions. But the social graph currently is under centralized systems, so data portability, right? But imagine if it were possible, if I could take all my followers, every tweet I've ever done, every Facebook post, every LinkedIn post, and I could move that to a blockchain-based system. Now, I'm talking very, very macro here. The technical details elude me. However, imagine a system, and we get closer to, in the article, this distributed system, where the social graph, so the communication channels you're using, are interacting with the very underlying governing processes of the tools. So as I'm typing something in a communication channel, I'll get a pop-up before I even finish typing what I'm saying. And it says, did you mean? You've probably seen this in search boxes, like in Google. Did you mean? And it relates to a proposal that's actually being, in process right now, that's currently being voted on. Oh, we'll take you right over there. With separate systems, you can't do that. That's one example of an infinite number. So when we have that social graph, we improve coordination efforts. Now, humans, at the end of the day, still have to communicate together. But when we can effectively merge those systems, and I don't mean merge in a simple way. I mean it like, if we can get to a part where the social graph exists on the very same chains that interact with these governance systems, then we have less game theoretic problems with coordination that we'd have in any other organization, which improves the larger collective system. In theory, that would be the grand scheme that would enable and unlock more potential, but we don't have that yet. So that's my grand theory that has no technical basis. But the assumption would be the chains would be interoperable, chains would be easier to create. You could take data, make it portable. But again, I don't think they'll give that data up, that power up easily. So there'll be a transition where probably new social graphs will have to be built for places like Facebook, which seems the least likely. Twitter seems more likely because Dorsey is very pro, Bitcoin at least. So.
What you've just mentioned with the social graph is, I guess, also related to the topic of IDs in such systems. And this is actually also reputation, identity, fluid identity versus reputation is rather something you build up and carry with you. And I think there is, we can create identities to an extent that we haven't seen yet in other systems. So it's something super exciting. So imagine you can change your identity and be something entirely different, someone entirely different from DAO to DAO. And actually, we've seen this in cases where people are subject matter expert here and somebody with voting power there, and perceived being anonymous as really different personalities. And at the same time, of course, there's this question of one token, one vote versus one person, one vote, plutocracy versus responsibility, and also reputation. So I think particularly when it comes to governance, ID is a really big topic here, also for token engineers, how to design governance processes and policies. Actually, it's, I guess, with fault tolerance, attack resistance, and collusion, there's the second aspect, which is coordination. And I'd love to dig deeper into that one as well. But first, Rohan, you'd like to add something here too.
Yeah. So as far as knowledge distribution goes, I think, so he was, if you go through the links in the paper, he was talking about Casper, the full finality ghost, I think. So yeah, there's a very significant barrier for anyone to involve themselves in such discussions. So the ideal way, as far as I'm concerned, is now that you have a politically decentralized or architecturally decentralized system, is something like Gitcoin grants to just allow new implementations to flourish. Because one of the problems is if some, so we have seen this in Linux. Linux is supposed to be an open source project, but it's really hard to make any useful contributions. One, because of technical barrier. Most people don't understand some of the architectural decisions that were made, or it's very hard to communicate to them why certain things are a bad idea. And if you don't know that this produces a very, let's say, caustic response from those who currently run the mailing list, who think you are either wasting everyone's time or something like that. So I think the best path forward for knowledge distribution would be something like Gitcoin grants, where, okay, the Ethereum Foundation says, okay, here's the white paper, here's a spec, make a new implementation. So multiple competing implementations would help in spreading at least the knowledge of the spec, even if you cannot talk about the technical details of implementation. Okay, so the spec itself is spread out, and it would lead to certain analysis in different sorts of ways. Okay, some people are able to run simulations on the spec and say, okay, this might happen in the future or something. Anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Yep. And this way make it more fault tolerant, or maybe even attack resistance in it. Okay, cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Rohan. And now see you. Apologies. You have raised your hand for a while. Sorry.
No single issue at all, Angela. So looking through that article, it does actually, what actually just kept ringing in my mind is how do we separate, you know, economic control and then also voting-driven control, right? We can take a look at, let's say, systems such as the US system, for example, that is a function of representation. I think that we would need to actually separate the, you know, that is a voting horizon or actually just a governance horizon from actually the economic point. Because if we merge those two together, there is, you know, it actually better enables collusion and then actually coordination. And I think that where actually some of our quote unquote advancement needs to actually come from is actually more so in how the humans who are actually going to be dealing with the voting side are actually chosen. Because there is a power vector there, but there is also a power vector from an economic side. And trying to actually just delineate the both of them, I believe you could even create a structure where those who have economic power have incentives that are actually fundamentally different from the few who have voting power. And there's an understanding of being able to, or, you know, maybe if you want to merge the both of them, you could actually just enable voting as a function of, you know, how long someone has had a token for. But I think that these, you know, it is hard to actually have these levels or actually these kinds of decentralization only if you are able to actually separate the voting horizon or the governance horizon from the economic horizon. If you put both of them together, you might have to create a system where actually, because naturally, one person tends to get richer than most, right? If they actually provide something that is of value, people over time give them their money to have their lives easier. And so capital always pools somewhere. That is just a natural law. So how do we create that as a cycle where capital that actually pools in one person's hands keeps getting redistributed? And I know that some people are probably chuckling because that sounds a lot like, you know, communism, but it is hard to actually separate power when you have an economic and governance incentive all merged together. So I think that that's extremely difficult. Personally, I think that there should be a public KYC on everyone, or that is a KYC that is made public on anyone who is actually chosen to vote. And that is in a DAO system, for example. And then economically, you know, those who have the most don't have the ability to actually just make, or just have like a, you know, like a 51% attack, for example, or there's a way to just reduce the amount of capital that they have to actually not enable that. It is an interesting mechanism that actually tries to keep everyone level, but then how do you enable incentives that are also monetarily driven? So it's a huge paradox in so many different ways.
Absolutely, CEO. And you already draw the line to our final session. I think this is a lot of really super interesting topics you've just touched on, and I'll be happy to continue the conversation. All this power distribution and ours, governance as a capital asset. Thanks for commenting. Let's have Tatiana. Hello again.
Yeah, hi there. So I just wanted to second on kind of what Angela and Rohan was saying about abilities to democratize and decentralize knowledge and contribution per se. Because even if we take these blockchains and their communities like Ethereum or Cardano themselves, we do have on one side a very centralized source of information and new impact, because like the close circle around Vitalik himself or Charles Hoskinson and Cardano are basically creating the most cited sources of information and like the main line how the system going to develop. And on another side, we might have some sort of like flat earth theory of total nonsense coming from people who don't have enough qualification to like impact. So there is this trade-off between just following the main leaders. Then we lose on the ability to see the impact from people who might be useful, but it's hard to notice in this like information like chaos. And on another side, like there is no good. It's like the same issue in science, right? When you're applying to like top tier journals, if you're coming from very unnoticeable university, it still takes a lot of time to sort of qualify your like impact and your work. So that must be even taking into account that all the information is accessible. This reputational score of the quality of the information is very biased still. And I think many DAOs inside this community should decide how it's going on. And from my subjective perspective, it's not there yet in none of the like big blockchains.
I would agree. And that said, there's a lot of work to be done for token engineers, right? Because we'll have to implement solutions and we have to put this in code, which will be even harder. A lot of political questions, find better solutions and design incentives that are basically expressed in algorithms. And that's hard not to crack. Luis.
Hi, everyone. I have a doubt regarding your comment before of Angela of the self-sovereign identity aspect. I think that's something that you mentioned is, to me, is a core element of any system, distributed system. But you mentioned something that caused me doubts regarding that you can have identities different for different applications, for different decentralized governance systems. And I think that can work for systems that doesn't have a stake on common good or public good services, like systems that are based on leisure applications like games or environments like this. But for public good systems, it's important that the identity of a person is just one. And that's why we, in this field, in the industry, there's now raising the development of proof of humanhood research on how we find ways to identify a person's identity while preserving the privacy behind of it. So I think this should never be replaced by the identities that can change over time. And in the aspect of voting, distribute voting systems, distribute money, even money. I think money is I'm doing research on the aspect of money. Money is a component, a social institution that there should be identity attached to it, and there should be a proof of humanhood of who is behind that wallet, independent of, I mean, nobody should have 20 wallets and receive a different share between those wallets just because has created several of them. So it's very important at the end to converge towards one identity for certain public goods. That's my opinion. What do you think about it?
I mean, I agree 100% that we can't give up accountability and responsibility just for the sake of anonymity. So this is not a good deal from my point of view. Nevertheless, I have seen so many different cases of identification that I wouldn't say that we should stick to. Ultimately, we should stick to I'm one single individual. I think for me, it's really an opportunity to have an identity in a particular network and a particular context, and to have a different one in a different context, as long as we maintain responsibility and accountability. And that requires transparency, but not transparency down to this particular human being. And I think here we see the connection of privacy, agency, and transparency, responsibility. And this is something I think we should keep separate, because otherwise we are missing a lot of the opportunities of the crypto space and the metaverse.
Interesting. Thank you.
I would love to at least touch on attack resistance, and there is this final element of collusion resistance. Both of them are super important for token engineers, and let's at least mention them. I read out again a tiny part about attack resistance. I quote, "In some pure economic models, you sometimes get the result that decentralization does not even matter for attack resistance." And he gives some examples. In fact, there are deep game theoretic reasons why centralization may even maximize this notion of economic security. So he says, sometimes decentralization can be even worse when it comes to economic attacks. And the transaction selection model of existing blockchains, so who is the miner, reflects this insight, as transaction inclusion into blocks through miners' block proposals is actually a very rapidly rotating dictatorship. However, once you adopt a richer economic model, and particularly one that admits the possibility of coercion or much milder things like targeted DOS attacks against nodes, decentralization becomes more important. What does this reasoning lead to? First of all, it pushes strongly in favor of proof of stake instead of proof of work. And second, it's a point in favor of having widely distributed development teams, including geographic distribution. Third, it implies that both the economic model and the fault tolerance model need to be looked at when designing consensus protocols. And here, I just want to raise awareness of economic attacks. So usually when people think about, okay, is a system attack resistant? Is it secure? People think of there are security audits for smart contracts, but actually this is the coding side of it. Economic attacks are a reality in crypto today. For example, the convex finance bribes earlier this year. So this is actually open invitation to bribe in order to allocating rewards for a certain curve stable swap pools. Happy to share the link here as well. Here we see in DeFi public attacks and public bribing, which is possible in decentralized systems. And there are even more sophisticated attacks, including, for example, meta smart contracts and game mining. And if we then think of, oh, since these smart contracts are self-enforcing and they are automatically triggered, what happens if then there's even AI in the loop coming up with meta smart contracts and just adapting or changing the smart contracts we originally built and put our trust in? What I'd like to highlight here is this universe of potential economic attacks in blockchains and in crypto is huge. And we token engineers should be the one to understand potential attack vectors and to prevent attacks. However, we are just at the beginning of noticing these attacks, of understanding these attacks, and we are not prepared at all to prevent them or to predict them. Sometimes we wouldn't even be able to see them and detect them at all. So every time we promote decentralized systems, we should keep in mind our actual goal with decentralization was and should be to make our systems attack resistant. But what's the point of it if we open up new attack vectors via the new mechanisms, the technology we built, and leave them unprotected with our cryptoeconomic designs? And how can we, as token engineers, further develop our understanding of these attack vectors? Christian, you want to add something here?
Yeah, it's not an attack, or I don't want to get into how everyone perceives it, but minor extractable value could be seen as an economic attack at the base level. And I think it's very important to talk about that. And obviously this article written 5 years ago was well before DeFi summer, and now minor extractable value, even as we move from proof of work to proof of stake in the Ethereum network, will always be there. And so from a token engineering standpoint, how do you plan and then discuss, what is acceptable for an economic attack on an everyday user? Because an institutional trader isn't going to want to use a system where their trades can be front run or back run. And at the same time, an everyday person isn't going to want that either. So how do you align minor incentives and everyday user incentives when you build the ecosystem? From that economic standpoint, I think is something that doesn't get talked about a lot about.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, the hope in cryptoland is that somebody will at some point, hopefully sooner than later, will come up with a better solution, like minor extractable value versus let's have like solutions like house swap, where you reduce the attack surface for miners or remove them at all. And of course, this is, it would be cool to solve all the problems via, okay, somebody will come up with a better solution, and then it's just everybody, all the users, of course, will prefer this better solution, and miners will won't have the chance anymore to extract value. On the other hand, of course, it's also pretty simplistic, right? Because we should be, as token engineers, we should aim for how can we build a system that is just robust enough, or how can we make it robust, and not just hope for, well, in 2 to 3 years, there will be a better solution. Somebody will build it. Anything else you'd like to add? Martino.
Hello, here. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. I think that I agree with say. I want even to raise the point that the smart contract upgradable has a great potential to improve all the token economics. So there are for sure some risk, but even some great advantage. From the other side, I was listening before discussion of VC and other big investors. I'm a bit skeptical about that. I think that just say that there is no free lunch. So if a big organization are committing a lot of money in this blockchain, I doubt they influence. So I'm not sure that it's good that we focus on DAO, and then there are corporations like Microsoft that make a big investment, like in company like a Consensus. Yeah, just to raise some question on the future. I think that is the idea of it is a moving target, so there is no best solution for the moment. We need just to adapt following the change.
All right, thanks, Martino. And see you. I'll give you the final word for this session today.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for that. This has been an awesome conversation. We see that there is a proof of stake, and then and then there is a proof of work, right? Rather than trying to actually stop all kinds of attack vectors, and this is just an idea, perhaps we can actually limit what each attack vector can actually do. I believe that the article did actually state that I believe that the node clients function as like that is as a rapidly changing dictatorship. I do remember that. So let's say, for example, you know, a quarter of the time that particular node client, or actually just looking across the network, picks say for this block to only just be enabled by proof of stake, and then maybe you have another block that is then enabled by proof of work. And if there is some other proof in the future, we can then limit the amount that is of execution that they have on the network.
Is this a question or a statement?
It is actually more of a question. Is it actually possible to have different blocks, just have different kinds of execution, whether it's actually proof of work or actually more of a proof of stake, and then we just limit the amount.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, please go ahead. Who is it?
This is Rohan. So we've had one project called Dash, which attempted to do this with both a proof of stake chain and a proof of work chain. It's not really grown much because both sides keep arguing about the incentive structure paid out, or the payouts for the people who are using proof of work with proof of stake. So it's, I mean, there have been attempts at this. They're not really worked out because they're not compatible incentives that you can offer to a proof of stake person that would be acceptable to a proof of work person, because they would be expending energy, whereas these guys would not. So they would.
What if we added voting as another incentive, as opposed to, that is the ability to vote goes only to those who have more of a proof of work protocol. At least they have more of an incentive to have power in the system.
Proof of work systems are effectively leader elections. So if you look at Bitcoin, a single block producer would have to attach the proof of work and say, okay, I attached my block. These are the transactions I've selected. And here's my proof that these transactions are valid. And here's the proof of the puzzle. So it's a leader election. It's a kind of a vote that's being taken. It's just that it's tied to the amount of energy that you spend. So proof of work is something similar, right? So
thank you for that. Thank you for explaining that, Rohan.
Okay, and this brings us back to the article we've discussed in the first session. So what is the purpose of a system, and what is the incentive? What are we optimizing for? What are the objectives here, and how can we express that in an objective function? And on the other hand, how can we maximize freedom? Coming back to this, why do we decentralize? This is such a huge opportunity to build fault tolerant, attack resistant, decentralized, in a sense, new organizations. And we'll continue the conversation next week with a series of articles. So there's a bit more to read. And one of the articles is all three articles are from Block Science. And one is, I quote, the statement that is so relevant for us in token engineering. Ultimately, we are building systems to maximize freedom while preventing dangerous conditions. And this is what we'll discuss in our next session. It's next Wednesday, same time. And make sure again to hop into our Discord channel, TE360. Patty just dropped the title and link for the next session for your readings. And you should have the Discord link. Patty, do you have it? Or maybe it's already in the chat?
It's already, but I can drop again.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And that said, thank you for joining us today. Make sure you add your thoughts in the next session. Hope to see you again there. And thanks for being here today. The Discord link is there. And let's continue our conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Grazie, Angela.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Bye-bye. Thank you.